Back in the early days of psychology, some researchers weren't just trying to understand the mind, they were trying to build it, and sometimes to break it. Today, we're opening a pretty chilling case file, one that's all about an experiment that tried to engineer human emotion right from scratch. So let me ask you something. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Spiders? Heights? Maybe speaking in public? And have you ever wondered where those fears really come from? Were you born with them, or did you learn them? It's a question that has been bugging people for, well, forever. But about a century ago, one man decided he wasn't going to just sit around and theorize about it. Nope. He was going to prove it. And he was going to do it by taking a perfectly happy, calm infant and literally installing a new fear, just to show that our deepest anxieties might be nothing more than a learned response. Our story kicks off with the architect himself, a psychologist named John B. Watson. He was one of the founders of a really radical new school of thought that saw human beings less as complex minds and more as programmable machines. For Watson, the whole field of psychology needed a massive overhaul. He thought we should just completely ignore all those messy internal things like feelings and consciousness. For him, the only thing that mattered was behavior you could actually see, actions that could be predicted, controlled, and this is the important part, conditioned. And wow, this quote right here, it really shows you the sheer scale of his ambition. This wasn't just some scientific theory to him, it was a total worldview. Watson was absolutely convinced that if he just had the right environmental triggers, he could shape any baby into anything he wanted. To prove it, all he needed was the perfect subject. So the search led him and his research partner, Rosalie Rayner, to an orphanage. And it's there that they found an infant who would become one of the most famous and frankly most tragic figures in the history of psychology. We only know him as Little Albert. At just 9 months old, Albert was, in their eyes, the perfect candidate. He was described as this remarkably calm and stable kid who hardly ever cried. When they first showed him a bunch of things, including a fuzzy white rat, he didn't show any fear at all, just a bit of curiosity. Watson thought he'd found his blank slate. What happened next was a cold, methodical, almost clinical procedure. It was designed to prove a really simple but also terrifying idea, that fear isn't born, it's made. Okay, so this table breaks down the cold formula Watson was using. It's all based on Pavlov's famous work with dogs. The logic is pretty straightforward. You take something that causes no reaction, that's your neutral stimulus, in this case the white rat. Then you pair it with something that naturally causes fear, the unconditioned stimulus, like a sudden jarringly loud noise. If you do that enough times, pretty soon the neutral thing all by itself will make you afraid. And that is exactly what they did. They gave Albert the white rat to play with, but every single time he reached out to touch it, Watson would slam a hammer against a steel bar right behind the baby's head. Imagine that terrifying, loud clang. Albert would jolt and just burst into tears, and they did this again and again. After just 7 times, spread over 2 sessions, that was it. The conditioning was complete. Now, when Albert saw the white rat, with no loud noise, nothing, he would start to cry, he'd turn his head, and he tried desperately to crawl away. Watson had done it. He had successfully manufactured a phobia. But the experiment wasn't finished. Watson wanted to see if this fear he'd built would stay specific to the rat, or if it would spread, like a virus of the mind, to other similar things. So in the next sessions, they brought out other furry things. A rabbit, a dog, a fur coat, even just a handful of cotton. And yep, a Santa Claus mask. And the results? Exactly the same. Intense fear, real distress. That specific fear of one white rat had grown, it had metastasized into a general phobia of pretty much anything white and free. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. The original plan actually had one last phase, to reverse the conditioning, to remove the phobia they had created. But that part never happened. Little Albert was adopted and moved away, and Watson and Rayner just lost track of him. The psychological damage done on purpose in the name of science was never, ever undone. So that abrupt ending left this huge, haunting question mark over the whole experiment. For almost 100 years, psychologists and historians have been trying to solve the mystery of what actually happened to the little boy at the heart of this infamous study. For a long time, the leading theory was that Albert was a boy named Douglas Merritt, who sadly died when he was only 6 from a neurological condition. This actually casts some doubt on the experiment, suggesting Albert wasn't a healthy infant to start with. But more recent research points to another kid, William Barger. Now, Barger lived a long life, but according to his family, he had this strange, intense dislike of dogs and other animals that he carried with him his entire life. Let's pull back a bit, because the unsettling story of little Albert doesn't just stand on its own. It's a really important piece in a much bigger, much darker puzzle about the ethical lines in science. See, in the race for knowledge during the 20th century, that line between scientific discovery and just plain human cruelty got really blurry a lot. The well-being of the subjects, especially the most vulnerable ones, often took a back seat to getting the data. I mean, look at this timeline. It shows a seriously disturbing pattern. You have the monster study, where researchers literally tried to induce stuttering in orphans through negative conditioning. Then there's the Milgram experiment, which showed that normal people would deliver what they thought were lethal electric shocks just because a guy in a lab coat told them to. And of course, the Stanford prison experiment, which had to be shut down after just 6 days because college kids playing guards became genuinely cruel. The thing is, the massive ethical failures of experiments like these forced a real moment of reckoning in the scientific world. All that suffering directly led to the creation of the institutional review boards and the strict ethical codes that we have today. They're designed to make sure that the rights and well-being of human participants are never sacrificed for a research goal ever again. In the end, the story of little Albert leaves us all grappling with this one huge question. It's a powerful, stark reminder that the quest to understand the human mind can never, ever justify destroying a human being's peace of mind. It really forces us to ask, where is the line? And who's there to protect us when science decides to cross it?